Tonight, we are reflecting on the career, life, and lasting impact of one of St. Louis's most influential media voices, Ray Hartmann.
Got to start feeling like we have something in common instead of trying to wall each other off.
Through decades of reporting, commentary, and public discourse, Hartmann helped redefine St. Louis media and create a more engaged and informed St. Louis.
To me, the punishment that would fit the crime is losing the privilege, which is what it is, not a right, to drive.
In 1977, when he was just 25 years old, at a time when traditional newspapers dominated the media landscape, Ray co-founded the Riverfront Times, a free alternative weekly paper that focused on in-depth reporting, local culture, and stories often overlooked by mainstream media. When many publications played it safe, Ray pushed stories that reflected the full reality of life in St. Louis, our successes, our struggles, and our complexities.
But as long as they have this exemption, as they're talking about for casinos, they don't have my vote.
It's no surprise then that in 1987, when Martin Dugan needed a highly opinionated, liberal voice for KETC's new public affairs show, Ray Hartmann was his guy.
Anheuser-Busch is not making charitable contributions to the NFL. They advertise in the NFL for one reason alone: they sell beer. And the fact of the matter is, St. Louis,
having local opinion and discussion in the news is, I think, been a healthy thing and something that's been really embraced in St. Louis, perhaps more than anywhere else in the country in terms of PBS stations.
I want to tell you this: they are disgraceful. Their stuff supporting apartheid. She was sponsoring
Ray
this
Hartmann,
person.
you're fascinating, Ray Hartmann.
Excuse me.
We
don't know what she paid these people.
For almost 4 decades, Ray Hartmann Donnybrooked his opinions, challenged those in power, advocated for human rights, and championed the First Amendment.
It's going to be dramatically cut back, and I can't imagine, unless you're part of this sort of culture that says we need sacrifice, but not by me.
His point of view drew cheers and jeers from viewers at home.
A lot of people will come up and say, I don't always agree with you, but, which is always kind of funny to me because I would hope nobody always agrees with anybody,
But whether you shared his viewpoint or not, there is no disagreement that Ray Hartmann used his voice in journalism, in print, television, and radio to engage the St. Louis community, to make people think about issues affecting this region, and to make an impact by seeing the humanity in everyone.
As far as what my plans are, I really did think today about Martin Dugan, the late, great provocateur that we all love, Martin Dugan. And the main thing I could say is, I could hear him saying it now, it's time to move on to something else.
Wow, thanks to Anne Marie Berger and team for putting that beautiful tribute to Ray together. And thanks to Dan Martin for that
I didn't know
drawing.
he'd done that.
I hadn't seen that either.
It was a surprise.
Oh, wow.
I will say this, all these years sitting across the table from Ray, I never really put it together until now that he started 2 St. Louis institutions, the Riverfront Times and Donnybrook, and he was on this show for 37 and almost 37.5 years.
And the thing about the Riverfront Times was it didn't have a natural niche. Like, in Phoenix, where I had been, it was a very conservative paper. And so there was a niche for the New Times. But here, you had a very liberal paper, and you had a very conservative paper. There wasn't a lot of room for Ray to maneuver, but somehow he made it work.
And what was so interesting about him, one of the millions of things so interesting about him, was that his whole persona back in the day was that he was sort of he was the anarchist, right? He was the anarchist. He was here to shake up the status quo, and he was. But at the same time, like every other Gemini out there, he was old guard. He was so incredibly respectful when it came to Martin Dugan, his treatment of Martin Dugan, no matter how deeply they were divided on a particular issue. He was so good to Martin. They loved each other so much. And he was an Eagle Scout. You know, I always loved that because my dad was an Eagle Scout, and you know, and turns out, according to Andy Leonard, Ray's father and grandfather were all Eagle Scouts. So he was as Sarah said, as we've all said, he was a mensch.
And I learned several things, you know, at his service. And one was, I did not know Ray liked to cook as much as he did.
I didn't either.
I would say,
No
like,
idea.
man, if I had known that, Ray, we would talk because I like to cook too. And I'm just kind of like, I didn't know that. But a man of so many talents, one that I didn't, you know of, but you know, Ray went to journalism school and told the story of his days at the Man-Eater and how he was the editor, you know, 2 years. Nobody had ever been the editor for 2 years. But the thing was that, like, Ray went to J school and he learned his craft. So when he began, I wasn't living here at the time, but when he began Riverfront Times, I know people think like it was just some wild, crazy, and the personal ads are just going to be wild and all that. But no, he started with a base that he knew journalism, and he was good at journalism, and that's why he was so successful, you know, on this program, but definitely in print journalism because he knew what he was talking about.
And I like that his son Ben said he did his homework.
Oh,
I knew he did.
Yes,
but Ben at the funerals talked about how his dad would be at the laptop at the kitchen table. I knew he was doing that.
He was always on the phone. At the last minute, it wasn't always me bringing up the rear. It was Ray because he was on the phone with people getting the story straight. Yeah.
I will say I knew Ray a lot less than anybody else at this table, but I think I'm the only person who regularly edited him for a couple of years. And boy, Ray wasn't just this great arguer and like this businessman. He was also a great writer. I mean, you could eat off of this copy. It was that clean. And, you know, he came in with his own ideas. He would sort of, you know, think hard about how he wanted to land it. He, of course, had to talk through how he wanted to land it. But, you know, I've heard so many stories about him in the last week from people who had such fond memories of the RFT back in the day. One of the most amazing was from a librarian in North County, and she said back when the RFT was just getting started, if the distribution guy who would drop off the stack of papers at her library was sick or whatever, Ray would personally be the person to drop that off. He wasn't just somebody who was all showing off and, you know, he worked so hard.
No, the late Joe Bonwich, food critic for various newspapers here, told me that in the early days of the RFT, he and Ray personally delivered the bundled editions to restaurants and bars or wherever. And Joe, thank you for joining us. You had a beautiful tribute in the Post-Dispatch this week to Ray.
Well, it was a hard story to write. You know, going back to what you were saying, though, is I think the thing that, one, I'll miss these, because I guess I got these calls before he turned his copy in. I would get these calls from Ray, where first of all, he'd always start with, I got some news tips for you. And 2 or 3 of them would be tips there's no way you could prove. Then he would start talking about a story. So this last one, and Bill at the service made a reference to it about Gabe Gore. And so I'm on the phone, and I always made sure that, so Ray would call, and I'd be busy. I'd let the call go through, because I knew I was never going to get off in less than an hour, and because we would just chew the fat anyway. But so he goes through the couple of stories, like, a couple of tips. I don't know if you can get that. And it's like, no, that's pretty impossible to get that story. Then he go, now this Gabe Gore thing, do you know he hasn't watched the videotape of the police shooting? And I said, I didn't know that. And he starts explaining it in detail, and I said, wow, that's a good tip. He goes, no, I'm writing about that one. So, I mean, like, you know, because I always used to kid with Ray, no great reporter ever gives you a great story. They'll give you a good story, but a great reporter's going to go, I got that one myself. So, and we ended that call, though, the last half hour, talking about the Green Bay Packers. You know, and that was the thing is that everybody looks at any of us as that this is all we do. This is the sum total of our existence, is talking about issues. Ray wanted to know who I thought the Packers were going to target in the draft. And we talked about stuff. that was not about major issues of our time. It was like, do you think we need more defensive backs? It's like, of course we do. And it was just regular conversation.
The other thing about Ray was everybody, he was very, very, very liberal, but he was a business person and didn't get government money. I remember when Mr. DeWitt was trying to build a new stadium, and to his credit, he went to talk to Ray seeking the support of the RFT. And Ray said, well, you don't need public money. You could go to the bank and sign a note for this. And Ray said that Mr. DeWitt said to him, I'm not used to signing notes, Ray. and here, he wanted government money, but he was the business person. And here Ray was, doing it all on his own without any government help, but he was the leftist.
Right.
That's what I mean. He was a throwback. In so many
We are so pleased to be joined right now via Zoom, I believe, with Bob Costas, the legendary Hall of Fame broadcaster from NBC and beyond, who is kind enough to join us for this segment. Bob, thank you very much for doing so.
Thank you, Charlie. I didn't spend as much time with Ray on a one-on-one basis as the group assembled here, but I followed him both on the air and in the Post-Dispatch and in the Riverfront Times for years and years. And I think I was a charter subscriber to his Substack, which was brilliant. You can be a good journalist and just be a serviceable writer. The point that Sarah made a moment ago is very important. He was a terrific writer. It's one thing to make a good point, but it becomes so much better if you express it elegantly and persuasively, as Ray did. And yes, you can say that Ray was a liberal, and of course he got along with Martin Dugan, because before MAGA came along, there were common principles and common understandings. He understood and made no bones about what is the most important political point of our time, which is that Trump and MAGA are not over here. They're just an extension, or by degree, more conservative. They're an entirely different animal. And he was unequivocal about the deep indecency and the deep assaults on common decency and what were once common across the board American principles that Donald Trump represents. He was a crusader, and I loved every word that he wrote, and I texted him many times just to say, attaboy, keep at it.
He would be so happy to hear those words right now. I'm glad you did text him.
Hey, Bob, Alvin Reed.
Hey, Alvin.
I wrote this week, and Andy Leonard, who spoke at the service yesterday, Ray loved basketball. And Ray told the story that he was the last guy cut from his varsity basketball team. But you probably know that Ray loved the Miami Heat. He loved basketball, and he would want to talk basketball as badly he wanted to talk politics.
And it must have really hurt him that the Spirits of St. Louis lasted for only 2 years. They did bring me to St. Louis, but they were gone. 50 years ago, actually, this month,
yes,
marked the end of the Spirits, and the Hawks had left prior to that. So poor Ray was left, I guess, just with the Billikens and the Mizzou Tigers.
No, I think he was a Hawks fan back in the 1960s. When did they leave?
1968 was their last year.
68, yeah. He grew up enjoying them on the court while they were still here. Well, coming from you, Bob Costas, because you are a wordsmith as well, and for you to pay tribute to Ray, it's just wonderful because, I think in many ways we took Ray for granted because we knew him for, almost 40 years. And sometimes it takes unfortunate incidents like this for us to really realize who was in our presence. And so,
it's obviously a great human tragedy, and the way it happened points up. This isn't a great insight, but just the randomness of our existence, no matter how much we plan. Somebody once said, we make our plans and God laughs. The randomness of this terrible tragedy, and that's the real most important aspect of this for Ray and for his family. But the loss of his voice is important. Even if most people don't go to Substack, his voice was important, and it resonated every time I read him. He was so on point, and he was so principled in everything he thought and the way he expressed it. I will miss him.
I was going to say the exact same thing using those same words, but now that you did, I won't have to. Bob Costas, thank you so much for joining us once again on Donnybrook.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you. How about that?
Wow.
Yeah. And he did tell me, Sarah, that you were a stickler as an editor. Behind your back, we talked about you.
I hardly changed a comma.
I don't know. That's not what he said.
Well, you know, that always could be, because I always think, you know, you talk about Ray, and I said, when you talked about it, and when I first started on this show as a fill-in, everybody'd go, how do you get along with Ray? Because figuring that our opinions would differ, I said, fabulously. I mean, you know, and I think that Ray stood for, or was the epitome of, but I think this show also does too, and I've said it before, is that you can sit here and disagree, and then you can go out and have a hamburger and a beer with people, and that it's over with. And that was then, and this is now, and you move on, and it's there's more to people. And like Bill said, he was sort of this capitalist businessman, which is sort of a right-wing thing, but then you're a left-wing on these issues, and I think that's what we're losing our grip on, is that a lot of people, we're conservative about some things, and we're liberal about other things, and it's not always lined up in some very color-coded line that we can just drag through. And I always thought that Ray also, too, he loved talking about his stories when he was a newspaper reporter in Albany, and talk about waiting for election results and just the boring grind that reporters do. He loved talking about that stuff almost as much as he liked talking about owning newspapers.
You know, you mentioned that he would have disagreements, then go have a beer or a burger afterwards. I was surprised. It wasn't until he passed that I learned that he had a yearly luncheon with John Lamping, a staunch conservative former Republican senator from Missouri. And he had a monthly luncheon with John Hancock, the former chairman of the state GOP. And I don't think that happens all the time when you get guys from this side and that side breaking
who
bread.
was his friend Rodney?
Scott Fawn.
What?
Scott Fawn. He was
Scott
also
Fawn,
very good friend.
Well,
with Scott
at
Fawn.
his wedding, the man who helped out was a Republican consultant whose name
Oh,
escapes
that's
me.
right. I should know that,
You know, now Ray's wedding was the sort of thing, it was like Woodstock. If you were there, you don't really remember it. You know, you remember bits and pieces of it. It was like out of The Great Gatsby. You know,
was,
he
yeah.
got
The
that
train.
and the train took everybody to Kimmswick.
It was
And
Unbelievable.
the party continued at Kimmswick.
Like a Agatha Christie novel.
It was
really was.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Like you said, if you were there, all right, no matter where you are in America, and somebody asks you, what's the best wedding you ever met? Ray Hartman's.
Ray
Like my
Hartman's.
wife and I in unison say Ray Hartman. Right, there's no
Ray
like,
Hartman.
was that the only wedding you ever went to? Like, no, but that one stands out.
And I've said this before, I'll bore you with it again, because I think it was telling. At that wedding, in lieu of gifts, they had all contributions to the APA or Paraquat.
Yes.
And they're asking for that right now in his loss. I don't think we got enough of Ray's haircuts. Do we have time to go to another piece so that we can see Ray through the years?
My dear friend Martin, who I worked for at the Globe Democrat in high school, invited me to audition for the show, and McClellan, and we actually auditioned in Mark Viddert's kitchen.
Well, let's take a vote on it. Do you agree?
The extent it has a good chemistry, it's because we all feel good about each other. Our differences are sincere, but that's what democracy is all about.
Some of the stuff he says, I just sit there and want to fall off my chair.
The name of the show is not Patty Cake. It's not Over the Teacups. And I want to remind you that I'm the guy who decides whether we move on here. Remember the
Go right ahead.
Ray, you can go from apples to giraffes. I've never seen like.
Okay, well, let's
you're probably
talk
gonna
about
bring,
either apples or
you're probably going to
giraffes.
bring Saddam Hussein into this somehow.
this is the...
and a person whose name I could mention but won't talks too much on this show.
Martin Dugan's friends on the far right of the party actually held a press conference and said he cannot run in our party if he doesn't sign off on these things.
Martin is a wonderful, wise, warm, witty, he's a hero to all of us on the panel at Donnybrook. He's the best.
Yeah, let's go on to something else. Ray Hartman, permit me.
You always want to let people finish. Let me finish.
We heard what you said.
No, you didn't hear what I said.
What is this?
This is your boy Karl Rove talking about Tim Kaine.
All right, now wait a minute, Ray. Why don't you put that damn thing away? Do me a favor.
And every week I check with Martin for almost 23 years to see if I'm still invited back. And So far, so good. I think we do economically and spiritually miss it, and I think that contrary to Rich Costas' predictions, we might as well get used to it because we're not going to see pro football here in this century.
We know this, Ray Hartmann, that for the first time in the history of the National Hockey League, the players have struck.
It's just another, it's the same as it was with baseball and football and basketball and all the other times athletes and owners are fighting to divide up a very big pie.
These guys are the most mercenary, bloodthirsty for the fans' money.
And they're going to the state of Missouri talking about how this stadium, which has just been refurbished in the last few years, it's beautiful, it's only 29 years old.
You know, people have bad hair days. I actually had some bad hair years.
Ray Hartmann, Ray Hartmann, Ray Hartmann.
There's never been any vulgarity, obscenity, anything we're ashamed of saying on this show in 21 years. And I'm proud of that.
We got a few minutes left.
And you just uphold those
We got a few minutes left.
Well, that's the way I brought up this subject. That's the way I posed the question.
But the other question wasn't. I don't listen to your questions. But the second after 19 years,
clear.
I'm not listening to the question.
Maybe the analogy is a family dinner table argument where you really get heated sometimes, and you really, it's not an act, but underneath it all, when you leave, and you're still your friend.
Somewhere up there, Martin Dugan saying, "That's enough out of you, Ray."
Enough out of you, Ray Hartmann.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, I'll tell you. You know, couple of things. I know you print journalists have embraced Ray as a print guy, but every week for 37 and a half years on television, I got to call him a broadcaster.
Oh my God, yes.
You know, I would tend to agree, except I know his love for obviously print journalism. But as I said, like, I don't think the show becomes what it has been without Ray. And as I said, it was his brashness, it was his intelligence, his hair. Seriously, I think he brought an audience that would not watch Channel 9. And they had something to come to that was as different as Riverfront Times was. And I think without it, I think the show would have been fine, but the show is special and owes a debt to Ray because I think that's why it became so special so fast.
It wouldn't have happened at all, really. I mean, the dynamic between Ray and Martin Dugan is what attracted people early on. You know, you could tell that despite being completely different, they liked each other. You know, and Ray opposed everything Martin cherished, but Martin liked Ray, and people could see that and get it, and so they tuned in again.
He was always so proud, because I believe him to be a closeted comedian, truly. I mean, the man was proud when he would get a zinger, and he would like practice it, and then we'd get to pick out the tie.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
He'd say, which one? I'd say, Ray, you're gorgeous. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. He'd say, well, yeah, I guess you're right. I am kind of gorgeous. But he was so self-deprecating and such a darling man. And I said earlier today to Greg, one of our family members here on the Donnybrook team, that he really was, by definition, he was a very powerful person in this town. He was a very
powerful person.
He was a very powerful person, and if you have any doubt, think of the people who attended yesterday's beautiful service at Temple Israel. He was a very powerful person, but he was a very gentle soul. And he was gentle with all of his friends, and he was a gift. He was a gift.
When she said about a comedian, one of the longest conversations I had and I knew Ray on and off for years, where I'd need to call to ask him a question about something he was involved in, whatever, but didn't really get to know him personally until I started filling in on this show. And one of the first conversations we had was an in-depth, long, and would have been boring to anybody but he and I, discussion about the comic genius of the Marx Brothers. And I found out, because we were both, and we were like trading lines from movies, and I'm like, oh my gosh, here's somebody who adores the Marx Brothers like I did. And so when I said, how could you get along with someone like that? How can you not get along with someone who doesn't recognize the Marx Brothers as the pinnacle of comedy, or that America's team is the Green Bay Packers? He understood these things, and those are the things that friendships are based on. Those are the things that people's relationships are based on.
Well, you see, he liked the Marx Brothers because he thought you were talking about Karl Marx.
Good line. Good line.
I will say this.
It was Groucho.
I talked to I knew many people who worked for him, and I never found one person who was upset with the experience. They all liked it.
Well, the RFT, before you got here, I think, Sarah, went after Ray a little bit. They solicited, anybody comments about Ray, especially former employees.
Right.
And I know Ray was upset, and I thought, well, this is a trashy thing to do to a good guy. And instead of nasty comments, former employees were offended that the newspaper was trying to get dirt on Ray, and all of the comments were in defense of Ray. And, I mean, and that's a remarkable thing, because people don't like bosses.
Yeah. I think he was a remarkable boss from anybody who ever worked with him at the RFT. He would hire these quirky people who were so idiosyncratic, but so talented, and then he would just let them run. He was the opposite of a micromanager. People respected that, and that's what made that paper so interesting in the years that he was in charge of it, is he would tolerate idiosyncratic voices. He wasn't trying to make everybody sound inverted pyramid or toe the line that he was pushing,
The late DJ Wilson really liked him, really appreciated working there. And DJ said, like, when Ray sold it, he told me, like, he said it can't be the same. And I always remembered that like he was that much of it, and we all knew it, but he said, like, it can't be the same. Yeah. And I, like I say, never worked for Ray like a day in my life, but everybody I talked to over there said, like, it was a truly unique experience.
Well, I think Ray is like so many other people I've met that I've bonded with, for the lack of a better word, but it boiled down to, and I heard this line years ago that just said, I like him in spite of, I love him because of. And I thought that was a great description of a lot of people who are dear in my life.
Oh, that's nice.
There's good and there's bad,
Thank
but
you,
at the end
Joe.
of the day.
Thanks for all your comments tonight. And we want to thank Dan Martin and Bob Costas, and especially Anne Marie Berger, our director, producer, who
I'll
put
be
this
having lunch
together.
with Dan Martin tomorrow.
Oh,
So
tell
I'll
him thank
pass
you
that
for
on.
us. But
in case you're not watching, Dan.
And Anne Marie, thank you so much for that loving tribute to our good buddy, Ray Hartmann. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. This program will be seen on YouTube, so if your friends and family didn't see it the first time, it'll be up there. Thank you, and see you next week.